Having examined the conceptual framework for a balance bench, surveyed its theoretical underpinnings, and gleaned lessons from jurisdictions that have experimented with hybrid models, we now turn to the practical question of implementation. How can a legal system transition from its existing adversarial or inquisitorial roots to a harmonized approach that preserves core protections while expanding the scope of judicial initiative? Moreover, what structural changes are required at the institutional, procedural, and cultural levels for such a shift to succeed? This chapter takes a closer look at the concrete measures needed to establish and sustain a balance bench. We begin by addressing the legislative and regulatory foundations essential for codifying new judicial powers and procedures, then move on to the internal transformations that must occur within courts, such as training programs, culture shifts, and resource allocation. We also consider the deployment of technology to aid in fact-finding and oversight, highlighting ways that modern innovations can bolster both efficiency and fairness. Finally, we explore ways to safeguard the independence of judges in a system that grants them broader investigative authority, and we underscore the importance of public trust as the ultimate measure of success. By focusing on these foundational elements, this chapter provides a roadmap for policymakers, judicial leaders, and legal practitioners committed to making a balanced bench a reality. The role of legislation and statutory reform. A balanced bench cannot simply be declared by judicial fiat. It must be grounded in clear statutory authority that defines the scope and limits of judges' roles. In purely adversarial systems, legislation tends to restrict judges to a neutral, reactive posture, confining their responsibilities to ruling on motions and overseeing the fairness of trials. Conversely, inquisitorial codes may vest judges with broad investigative powers, but offer fewer adversarial safeguards. Creating a harmonized model often requires a comprehensive overhaul of criminal procedure codes, civil procedure statutes, or both. At a minimum, legislative reforms for a balanced bench should include expanded judicial inquiry powers. Statutes might grant judges authority to request additional evidence, call witnesses not suggested by the parties, or appoint independent experts in complex cases. However, these powers must be bounded by procedural rules, such as requiring disclosure to all parties and allowing for objections and rebuttals, to maintain transparency and avoid any perception of bias. Procedural checks and balances. Legislation should establish formalized procedures for parties to challenge judicial interventions they deem excessive. These might include interlocutory appeals, mandatory hearings before a different judge if conflict of interest arises, or strict documentation requirements that record each judicial action and its rationale. Clear separation of roles. In systems transitioning from an inquisitorial framework, laws should delineate the difference between investigative functions and adjudicative functions, ensuring that the same judge does not unilaterally dominate all phases of a case. In purely adversarial jurisdictions, reforms must carefully set limits so that judges do not replace the advocacy roles of attorneys, but instead complement them. Depending on the jurisdiction, these legislative reforms may be enacted at the national level or incrementally adopted by state or provincial legislatures. In either scenario, inclusive consultation with judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, civil society organizations, and the wider public can help build consensus and mitigate resistance to change. Above all, clarity is essential. A balanced bench thrives on well-defined authority, transparent oversight mechanisms, and a shared understanding of how new procedures will function in practice. Judicial training and culture shift. Even the most carefully drafted legislation will fail to take root if the judiciary is not prepared by skill set or mindset to exercise newly granted powers responsibly. In adversarial systems, many judges have been trained primarily to preside, referee, and rule on motions. Likewise, in inquisitorial environments, judges accustomed to expansive investigation might struggle with incorporating robust adversarial safeguards. Thus, implementing a balanced bench requires a deliberate, well-funded training effort to recalibrate the judicial role. Key components of effective training programs might include inquisitive yet neutral questioning. Judges need to learn how to probe witness testimony without overtly guiding it toward a preconceived narrative. Training sessions could feature mock trials, where judges practice formulating open-ended questions that illuminate the facts while respecting each party's advocacy role. Evidence management. As the balanced bench model often involves a shared dossier or a central repository of evidence, judges must be adept at organizing, reviewing, and integrating information. Workshops might cover techniques for structuring pre-trial conferences, ensuring all parties have access to the evolving evidence, and preempting abuses of discovery. Cultural competence and sensitivity. Because hybrid systems often place judges in closer contact with witnesses, especially vulnerable individuals, training should emphasize empathy, active listening, and cultural awareness. These skills are particularly crucial in cases involving minors, survivors of domestic violence, or marginalized communities. Ethical guidelines and boundaries. Judges must navigate ethical codes that prohibit bias and demand impartiality. When judges have more latitude to question witnesses or commission expert reports, the risk of perceived partiality grows. Training can clarify how to maintain professional distance while still pursuing thorough fact-finding. Beyond formal instruction, a deeper culture shift may be necessary in legal communities. Judges, lawyers, and court staff may harbor deeply entrenched notions of what real justice looks like, often viewing alternative practices with skepticism. Engaging respected figures, such as senior judges or legal scholars, to champion the balanced bench approach can help challenge traditional assumptions. A culture that values transparency, collaboration, and fairness in judicial inquiry is far more likely to embrace a hybrid model than one that views any deviation from the norm as an unwelcome intrusion. Resource allocation and infrastructure. While legal reforms and judicial training are indispensable, they cannot succeed without adequate resources. Transitioning to a balanced bench often entails expanded court personnel. A more active judicial role in fact-finding may require additional staff support. For instance, law clerks or judicial assistants could help review evidence, liaise with parties, and document court-initiated inquiries. Likewise, specialized clerks might be needed to manage digital evidence repositories. Enhanced legal aid. If judges are empowered to direct a more comprehensive investigation, defense counsel, particularly for indigent defendants, needs sufficient resources to respond. This may involve hiring investigators, expert witnesses, or specialized attorneys who can navigate complex forensic data. Without adequate funding for indigent defense, any new procedural rules risk exacerbating inequalities. Technological upgrades. Courts may need to modernize their case management systems to handle an expanded evidence record, track judicial interventions, and ensure parties have online access to shared documents. Investing in secure digital platforms can streamline the process while enhancing transparency. Physical courtroom adaptations. In systems that are shifting to more oral proceedings, as in many hybrid reforms, courtroom layouts may need to change. Judges might require additional space for electronic displays, evidence storage, and simultaneous interpretation equipment. Audiovisual recording systems can also be essential to preserve a clear record of judicial questioning and witness responses. Securing budgetary support for these initiatives frequently proves the most challenging aspect of implementing a balanced bench. Legislatures or executive agencies controlling the purse strings may hesitate to increase judicial funding, especially if they perceive little public demand for systemic reform. Building a persuasive case often involves demonstrating that initial investments in training, infrastructure, and technology could eventually reduce costs by resolving cases more efficiently and decreasing the likelihood of protracted appeals or retrials. Integrating technological advances. As courts worldwide grapple with surging caseloads and increasingly complex evidence, ranging from digital communications to sophisticated forensic analyses, technology can be a powerful ally. In a balanced bench context, technology serves several critical functions. Evidence management platforms. Centralized systems can store dossiers, depositions, expert reports, and digital evidence in a format accessible to all parties. Judges can track what has been reviewed, and attorneys can receive notifications when new materials are added. This transparency reduces opportunities for trial by surprise and streamlines judicial oversight. Virtual hearings and depositions. While face-to-face interactions remain important, remote proceedings can increase efficiency, especially for preliminary hearings or status conferences. Judges can direct inquiries via video link, and parties can participate regardless of location. This approach may also reduce the time and cost associated with transporting detainees or expert witnesses. Real-time transcription and translation. Technology that provides immediate transcripts or translations, where feasible, can facilitate multilingual proceedings and help judges formulate accurate questions. It also allows counsel to review testimony promptly for inconsistencies or relevant leads. Data analytics and pattern recognition. In more advanced settings, analytic tools could help judges or parties detect anomalies in large volumes of evidence, such as financial records in white-collar crime cases, allowing for targeted questioning. These methods must be deployed carefully to avoid delegating judicial discretion to algorithms, but they can support more informed inquiries. Implementing these technological measures requires attention to data security, privacy rights, and equitable access. Not all parties, especially those with limited resources, can afford the same high-tech solutions. Hence, courts must ensure that no litigant is disadvantaged by unequal access to digital tools. Done wisely, however, technology can amplify the foundational goals of a balanced bench: thorough, transparent, and fair adjudication. Safeguards for judicial independence. One of the most frequent concerns about hybrid systems is the possibility that judges, imbued with investigative powers, might lose their impartiality. To allay such fears, institutional structures must be designed to protect not only judges from improper influence, but also litigants from potential judicial overreach. Key measures include appointment and tenure protections. Judges should be insulated from political or prosecutorial pressure. If they fear that controversial inquiries could jeopardize their careers, they may shy away from using investigative powers effectively. Guaranteeing judicial tenure, offering transparent selection processes, and establishing independent judicial councils can help. Panel-based decision-making. Instead of granting a single judge unilateral control over both investigation and adjudication, courts might employ panels of judges who share or alternate roles. One judge might oversee pretrial fact-finding, while a different judge or set of judges presides over the trial. This structure dilutes the potential for bias to go unchecked. Open hearings on judicial interventions. Whenever a judge initiates a new investigative avenue or calls an additional witness, the action should be recorded and explained in open court or a similarly transparent forum. This ensures that parties can challenge the intervention if they suspect it reflects hidden prejudices. Robust appellate review. An appellate mechanism that can promptly correct a judge's overreach is fundamental to maintaining confidence in the system. Appellate courts should have clear guidelines for determining when a judge's inquisitorial activities are incompatible with fair adjudication. Swifter, more accessible appeals in such contexts can serve as a strong deterrent against judicial excess. The guiding principle is to empower judges to pursue truth proactively while creating guardrails that preserve their neutrality. These measures reassure the public and legal community that a balanced bench will not devolve into a new form of unaccountable authority. The importance of public confidence. Ultimately, the legitimacy of any judicial system hinges on the public's belief that it dispenses justice fairly and transparently. Even the most effective hybrid procedures will falter if they are shrouded in secrecy or perceived as elitist experiments with little relevance to ordinary people's lives. Thus, any successful implementation strategy must include a focus on public outreach, education, and feedback. Public information campaigns, ranging from user-friendly websites explaining new procedures to partnerships with community organizations, can demystify a balanced bench for laypersons who might otherwise find it bewildering. Journalists covering court proceedings should be briefed on what has changed, why these changes matter, and how the new processes are supposed to safeguard rights more effectively. Community forums or open court days can allow citizens to observe hearings and ask questions, thereby fostering a greater sense of ownership and trust in the reform process. Furthermore, effective feedback loops can help courts refine their procedures. For example, court administrators might solicit anonymous feedback from litigants, attorneys, and observers about their experiences under a balanced bench. Periodic reviews, perhaps conducted by a judicial council or an independent oversight body, can evaluate whether the system is achieving its goals of fairness, efficiency, and accuracy. Based on these reviews, policymakers can adjust procedures, allocate additional resources, or refine training programs. In this way, the balanced bench model becomes a living system, continually evolving in response to societal needs. Moving from theory to practice in creating a balance bench is no small feat. Legislative reforms must clearly delineate new powers and responsibilities, while training initiatives equip judges and legal professionals with the skills and mindset to navigate a hybrid environment. Investment in technology and infrastructure is critical to ensuring that evidence management, case oversight, and trial processes remain transparent, accessible, and efficient. At the same time, robust safeguards, ranging from judicial panels and appellate review to public accountability, must be put in place to protect judicial independence and preserve the rights of litigants. Through deliberate and well-coordinated implementation strategies, the lofty ideals of a balance bench can indeed take shape in real-world courtrooms. As subsequent chapters will highlight, this transition is an ongoing process that requires periodic reevaluation, course corrections, and constant engagement with both the legal community and the broader public. But the potential rewards: a court system that marries the strengths of adversarial rigor with inquisitorial thoroughness, amply justify the effort. By systematically addressing legislative, institutional, and cultural hurdles, societies can lay the groundwork for a judicial future in which truth-seeking and fairness serve as mutually reinforcing pillars of justice.